The violence that swept France in the past week in response to the shooting of a French teenager by police has reopened questions about racism and inequality within society, particularly with regard to how police deal with those from North Africa. It's also challenged the French state's unwavering adherence to a colourblind one-nation secularism. Well, Nabila Ramdani is a journalist and author of Fixing France, How to Repair a Broken Republic. Nabila, good morning to you.
Good morning.
And do you believe that what we have seen over the last week is a further demonstration of that broken republic?
Well, absolutely. I think there is no doubt there has always been tensions, huge tensions and poisonous relations between the police and indeed young people from an ethnic minority background. And he took an extreme example like Nahel's killing to reignite all those tensions and bring them even more to the fore. And what hasn't helped at all, dare I say, is Emmanuel Macron's reactionary approach, his tough and lauder agenda. And many people are saying that this has in fact increased the violence, sending paramilitaries, highly trained officers with machine guns and smothering communities with tear gas and hitting them with batons at any opportunity when involving police brutality is not solving anything.
Has there been a lack of willingness on the part of the political classes to discuss what many people see as perhaps ingrained racism and racial discrimination within the law enforcement?
I do think so. I do think that's the case. There's a general malaise in France. There's a widespread sentiment that large swathes of French society, mainly people from African and North African backgrounds, are being discriminated against in all aspects of their lives, from education opportunities to housing and indeed employment. And they are left behind. And it will take very little to reignite all these unrest if those issues related, to be put in simple terms, to fairness and indeed respect are not dealt with in the long term. So these endemic problems will not go away. France is, of course, meant to be, on paper, a colourblind republic, meaning that it doesn't discriminate against people based on their race or indeed their religion. But in practice, it is anything but. And it seems that your race, your skin colour and your religion, in fact, do matter when it comes to being left out.
And does that perhaps lack of acknowledgement of the differences between people and their different needs perhaps lead to some of the issues that we're seeing here as well? Because the government is not taking on board the fact that some people may need extra help.
Yes, indeed. I mean, officially, France does not collect ethnic minority data. Meaning that it cannot gauge the scale of the problem. So there needs to be a change in culture in all this. But more crucially, I think, the very principles of liberty, equality and fraternity for all French citizens that underpin the French Republic must be applied. And that means more community policing is needed. There are a number of reports by human rights organizations, including the United Nations and indeed France's own cassation courts, that have ruled that France's police has a problem with institutionalized racism. So there's more sensitivity that is needed while dealing with ethnic minorities and not sending paramilitaries at any opportunity. And dare I say, Nahel is not the first victim of police brutality. Only his killing was captured on video. But one of the problems that needs to be addressed is the constant complaints about racial profiling from police, meaning that if you're a brown-skinned Arab or indeed a person of black heritage, you are being singled out for searches solely because of what you look like. So fleeing armed officers is in fact becoming a fact of life in France, regardless of the alleged reason for a police check.
And how much of this is being exploited by some of the political classes there? We've seen at recent elections the rise in popularity at times of the far right. Is this something that is boiling over into the political discourse?
Yes, absolutely. Marine Le Pen, the leader of the National Rally, which used to be known as the National Front, is, dare I say, relishing all this. Let's not forget that her platform as a presidential candidate, she was a runner-up to Emmanuel Macron at the last two elections. Her platform is always an anti-immigrant agenda. She's brought that into the discussion in relation to Nahel's killing, even though Nahel was, of course, a French citizen born and raised in France. But she also seems to be supporting the forces of law and order, even when they seem to be acting in a reckless manner. And dare I say, Nahel's background as a French citizen of Algerian origins is crucial to this discussion.
Yes, well, talk to us a little bit more about that, if you would, and relations, this uneasy relationship between France and Algeria.
Absolutely. I mean, Nahel is of course a French citizen from an Algerian background, and this has exposed the treatment of similar French citizens by the French states. There have been tensions between Algerian communities and the French police going right back to the days when Algeria was a French colony. Algeria won a very savage war of independence, which ended in 1962, but this has caused huge anger and indeed grievance amongst millions of French nationalists who wanted to hang on to Algeria. Nanterre has particular historical resonance because it was the site of the biggest shanty towns in France in the 1950s and the 1960s, where up to 10,000 North Africans, mainly from Algeria, migrant workers, were parked there with no electricity or running water, and most of the young men who were living on those sites were branded as insurgents. They were seen as an enemy within, and they were themselves subjected to extrajudicial killing and indeed torture by the Paris police. This reached a low point in 1961 when riot control squads massacred up to 300 Algerian protesters in cold blood during a peaceful anti-Algerian war demonstration, meaning that Algerians were brutally murdered in central Paris. They were hanged from trees in nearby woods. They were also thrown off bridges into the River Seine and left to drown. Crucially, this historical context is important because such crimes were covered up for decades. Nobody has ever been brought to justice for them. And there are fears that Nahel's case will not get justice either. That's why you hear rioters shouting revenge for Nahel when they take to the streets. And those shanty towns where those migrant workers were living and have now developed into bleak council estates. Yep. And there's the sentiment that their descendants are now also treated like second-class citizens.
Nabila, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. That is Nabila Ramdani, who is a journalist and author of Fixing France, How to Repair a Broken Republic.